Lesson 3.3, Comparing and Ordering Decimal Numbers. The learning intention is to compare and order decimal numbers. The success criteria is to compare using the symbols less than, equal to, and greater than. We also need to order decimal numbers using the symbols greater than and less than. The things that you need to know before the lesson is to be able to identify decimal number places. Know that each digit to the left or to the right is either 10 times greater or 1/10 the current digit given. Let's get started with our example problem. This comes from our Go Math Big Book. The table lists some of the mountains in the United States that are over 2 miles high. These are the mountains' height with their state, and the height is given in miles. There's Boundary Peak, which is in Nevada, and it's 2N 488 thousandths of a mile. There's Cloud Peak in Wyoming, and it's 2N 495 thousandths of miles. And there's Grand Teton Peak in Wyoming, and it's 2N 607 thousandths of a mile. And there's Wheeler Peak in New Mexico, and it's 2N 493 thousandths miles. So the first thing it says is, how does the height of Boundary Peak in Nevada compare to the height of Cloud Peak in Wyoming? So that is these two first peaks here and mountain heights given in the miles. So the first thing we do is we're comparing. We always want to line up to compare number values by decimal places and number places. So if we want to call the numbers to the left of the decimal, we can call those whole world, and the numbers to the right of the decimal land. So we line them up by place value. So the ones place for this Boundary Peak is we have a 2 in the ones, a 4 in the tens, an 8 in the hundredths, and an 8 in the thousandths. For the Cloud Peak, we have a 2 in the ones, a 4 in the tenths, a 9 in the hundredths, and a 5 in the thousandths. Thinking about that, we're going to be starting from left to right, knowing that the ones place is one whole number, the tens place is that whole cut into tens, the hundredths place is that whole cut into 100 pieces, and the thousands place is that whole cut into 1,000 pieces. So if we look from the left to right, just like we read from left to right, we start with the largest place value, which is the ones place here. We see that there is no difference between the numbers, so we move to the next place, which is the tens. There's no difference there, so we move to the hundreds place. There is a difference, so we are going to stay here and we are going to concentrate on this place value, the hundreds place. We see in the hundreds place that there is an 8 and there is a 9. That means there is 8 of these hundredth pieces and there's 9 of these hundredth pieces. So we know if we're comparing these two numbers that the 8 is less than because you only have 8 of the 100 pieces, and 9 is greater than because you have 9 of the 100th pieces. So thinking about that, we want to use these two symbols. Reading these two symbols, we have this one and that one. To read them, I tell students that you just concentrate reading from left to right, just like with words, just like with numbers. So if the smaller side is on this side, we read from this side to that side. And to help you remember that this is less than, this is the smaller side, so you read less than because it's smaller to bigger, so less than. And to read this one, this is the larger side of this symbol, so we read greater than, greater than. So we have less than and we have greater than. So I know then, trying to arrange this, comparing the hundredths place, that this 2N 488 thousandths is less than the 2N 495 thousandths. Moving on to compare all the numbers. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stack them. My decimal gets written first, it's already there. So I'm going to stack them with the decimal written first and then the numbers on either side. So here I have the decimal written first and then the ones and then the numbers on either side. So now I'm starting again from left to right, knowing that there's no difference here, but now when I'm comparing all numbers, I see that there's a difference in the tens place. So going from greatest, ordering the numbers from greatest to least, I know that I'm going greater than. So going from greatest to least in the tens place, I see that this number here is greater. I have 6 of these tenths versus 4 of the tenths. So I know then that that number is going to be written first. So I know that 2 and 607 thousandths is written first. I cross that out because I have already used that one. I use my symbol greater than, no more alligator saying references, and no more commas. I know that I'm going to write it in the 5th grade manner, and that is greater than. And then I look for the next number. The tenths, there's no difference with the rest of the remaining numbers, so I move on to the hundredths, looking for the greater number because we're going from greatest to least. I see here there are 2 different 9s in the hundredths place, so I have 9 of the hundredths. But I see that there is the same 2 numbers and they're greater than this one. So I'm going to save this 8, the number with the 8 in it, last because I know that's going to be the least because it only has 8 hundredths. So now moving on, because there's no difference with the 9s, I have to see which one in fact is greater of the 2 900ths. I know both of them are greater than this number that has 8, only 8 hundredths. So moving on to the now thousands place, only comparing these 2 numbers. And I see now that there are 5,000s and 3,000s. I see that this number is bigger because it has 5 of these thousands versus 3. So my second number in this would be 2 and 495 thousands. I can go ahead and get rid of that. Then that means the next number then must be this one. I'm not going to go back to this one because I can't compare it with the thousands place, knowing that already in the hundreds place that this 9 was bigger. So knowing that, I know that this number is now still the same symbol of greater than, and it's 2 and 493 thousandths. I can go ahead and cross that one out as well, knowing that the last one is this 2 and 488 thousandths. And now I can go ahead and read this as 2 and 607 thousandths is greater than 2 and 495 thousandths, which is greater than 2 and 493 thousandths, which is greater than this 2 and 483 thousandths. So now let's go ahead and talk about our common mistakes. Common mistakes that I see are students ordering or choosing the number when they're comparing to, choosing the number that has the greatest amount of digits. I see this has 2 digits, this has 1, so some students will say this one must be larger, so let's go ahead and have it greater than. In fact, that is not the case. It's like this, 75 cents versus 80 cents. So you don't want to do that. You always want to line the digits up and stack them. But sometimes when students stack them, they'll just go ahead and line up all the decimal or line up the numbers versus the place values. So they'll just stack them in this case. When you do this, you are not lining up the place values and you can't truly compare because you are comparing now the tens place and the ones place. You can't really do that. So you want to make sure that you line them up based on place value. If you need to, you bring in the zeros. So the first thing you do when you're comparing is you stack them on top by place value. Remember, I write the decimal first, and now I can place the digits around it, bringing in zeros if I need to fill in those holes, basically, places where there's no numbers. And then another mistake that I see students do is that they will compare starting from right to left. You don't read right to left, so you don't want to compare right to left. And if you do that, they're comparing these 2 numbers and they might say the 5 is greater than, so then that must be the bigger number. However, this is talking about the hundreds place, and remember the size of those versus the tens place, and that's the size of those. So we always start from left to right, and we would in fact be comparing the tens place first and not the hundreds place, and we would then see that this number that has the 8 in the tens place is actually in fact bigger. So now that we know our common mistakes, let's start with our practice problem number 1. Remember to do this step by step, pausing as instructed and then checking back in. So Mount Whitney in California is 2 and 745 thousandths of a mile high, and Mount Rainier in Washington is 2 and 729 thousandths of miles high, and Mount Harvard in Colorado is 2 and 731 thousandths miles high. So the first thing you have to do is you have to compare the 2 heights, Mount Rainier, which is here, and Mount Harvard. So I know that I need to stack the numbers on top of each other. I'm going to stack this one first just because it's the given value first. My decimal goes first so that I can line up the place values and not just stack the numbers. So this is in the ones place, tens place, hundredths place, and thousandths place. Going from left to right, I see there's no difference in the ones, no difference in the tens. So the first place that I'm going to be looking at is the hundredths place. I know that I'm just comparing the two digits, so I see that this 2 hundredths, which are about these size pieces, is less than the 3 hundredths pieces. So 2 of those is less than the 3 of those. So I know then that I would put the symbol this way because this set 2 and 729 thousandths is less than the 2 and 731 thousandths. If they didn't have this little circle in the middle and you were just going to be writing it yourself, know that you could write this number first. But if you did that, you would have to make sure that you say this number is now greater than this 2 and 729 thousandths. So you could do it that way as well, using this number first, but however, this number is now greater, so your symbol would have to change. So now if I'm going to actually compare all numbers, I need to stack all of them on top of each other by place value. So I'm going to do my decimals first. Notice how I did that. And each digit should be on top of each other. And then decimal first, each digit place value on top of the other. Going from left to right, there's no difference in the ones place. There's no difference in the tens place. So it looks like I'm focusing first on the hundredths place. And then I look back at this to help me, and I know I'm going from least to greatest. I'll even write my symbol to remind me the symbol that I'm using. No more commas, no more semicolons in 5th grade. We're going to use this in between. So now looking here, I see that I have going from least to greatest. This is the least number because there's only 2 hundredths. So that number would go first. 2 and 729 thousandths is less than, I've used that. Now I'm looking at the other two numbers. Going from least to greatest, this 3 hundredths. So I know 2 and 731 thousandths, I use that number. And now my last symbol, less than, is less than 2 and 745 thousandths because that is the greatest. So I see it's 2 and 729 thousandths is less than 2 and 731 thousandths, which is less than 2 and 745 thousandths. So now let's try practice problem number 2. Remember, you are going to be completing this and then checking back in. But first, look at these given numbers. It doesn't give it to you in a story problem. It just gives you these given numbers. So make sure you read them first because it's good practice to try to read them. That is one of our previous lessons. And then the first thing you're going to do is compare just the two numbers and tell which one is greater than or least than. And then you're going to order all 4 numbers from greatest to least. Go ahead and pause and then check back in. When you did that, hopefully you saw comparing the numbers. I went ahead just to compare the two. I stacked them on top of each other, knowing that there was a missing digit, so I went ahead and placed a 0. No difference in any place except the thousandths place. So when I'm looking at them, I see this number is less than because there's 0 thousandths and this has 1 thousandths. So since this number is written first, if we were comparing the two, 1 and 32 hundredths is less than 1 and 321 thousandths. Or if it was written this way, 1 and 321 thousandths is greater than now 1 and 32 hundredths. So when I'm comparing all numbers going from greatest to least, so I'm using this symbol, I have to stack them all. I see there's no difference in the ones, so I go to the tens. I see there's a difference and it's the greatest, and that's what I'm looking for here, so I use that first. And then there's no difference in the rest of the numbers, so I look at the tens and I see that this one with the 8 hundredths, I meant hundredths, is larger, so I use that one next. And then there's no difference between the 2 hundredths, so I go to the next one and I see that 1 hundredth is greater, so I use that next. Please don't forget to do your lesson homework. That is practice book page 54, numbers 1 and 2. Remember, go ahead and do them so you are prepared for the discussion tomorrow. The things that you need to have for your lesson tomorrow when you come to class is all of these. You do not have to write the common mistakes, but you do need to make sure you have everything else, including your practice problems and your lesson homework. See you tomorrow.